21 hours, the highest-level U.S.-Iran meeting since 1979, and it ended with 4 words: "We have not reached an agreement." On the morning of April 12, 2026, Vice President JD Vance walked out of the Islamabad Serena Hotel in Pakistan with nothing to show for a marathon negotiation session that stretched across 2 days. Across the table from him sat Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, backed by a 70-member Iranian delegation. The American side brought roughly 300 people. Pakistan had offered itself as mediator. The ceasefire that began on April 8th was supposed to hold for 2 weeks, expiring around April 22nd. That left just 10 days to find peace. They found nothing. One word killed this deal: nuclear. Everything else on the American 10-point peace proposal was moving forward. Sanctions relief, war reparations, regional security. Progress was being made on all of it. But when it came to Iran's nuclear program, the room froze. Vance demanded what he called an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and that they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. Iran holds an estimated 460 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. That is enough fissile material, if enriched further, to produce roughly 11 nuclear weapons. The United States wanted Iran to commit to zero enrichment, permanently. Iran refused. Within hours of the talks collapsing, President Trump posted on Truth Social in all capital letters: "Iran is unwilling to give up its nuclear ambitions." He called the nuclear question the only point that really mattered. And just like that, 21 hours of the most direct American-Iranian diplomacy since the Islamic Revolution of 1979 amounted to nothing. Vance stood in front of cameras after leaving the hotel and delivered a line that carried a clear warning. "The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the USA." That phrasing was not accidental. It was a signal, directed at Tehran, that the United States was prepared to escalate. Iran pushed back hard. Foreign Minister Araghchi said his country had negotiated in good faith, but ran into maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade. Iran's delegation accused the Americans of introducing new agenda topics in the middle of the talks, specifically issues about the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Gulf region, topics Iran said were never part of the original framework. Iran's embassy in Ghana even posted publicly that the United States had flown Vance halfway around the world to demand at the negotiating table what it could not achieve through war. Ghalibaf, Iran's parliamentary speaker, framed the failure through the lens of history. "Before the negotiations, I emphasized that we have the necessary goodwill and determination, but due to the experiences of the 2 previous wars, we do not trust the other side." He went further. "America has understood our logic and principles, and now it's time for it to decide whether it can earn our trust or not. That trust deficit sits at the center of this conflict, and has for decades. Broken agreements, rounds of sanctions, military strikes. Iran sees every American demand through that filter, and the Americans see Iran's 460 kilograms of enriched uranium through theirs. Here is where the situation turns from diplomatic failure to military reality. The war between the United States and Iran has now been active for 44 days. 2 American-guided missile destroyers have already transited the Strait of Hormuz, the first time U.S. warships have passed through that waterway since the fighting began. The U.S. military is now positioning assets for what analysts believe is the beginning of a naval blockade targeting Iranian ports. If that blockade takes full effect, Iran's ability to export oil and import goods collapses. The economic pressure would be staggering, but the Strait of Hormuz problem cuts both ways. During the opening phase of the war, Iran planted naval mines in the strait to deny passage to commercial and military shipping. Now, according to multiple reports, Iran has lost track of some of those mines. Tehran literally cannot fully reopen the waterway it closed. That means even if Iran wanted to use the strait as a bargaining chip, offering to clear it in exchange for concessions, it cannot guarantee safe passage. This is a problem that affects not just the United States and Iran, but every nation that depends on oil flowing through that 21-mile-wide choke point. Roughly 20% of the world's petroleum passes through the Strait of Hormuz on any given day. Those mines sitting unaccounted for on the seafloor represent a danger to every tanker and cargo vessel in the region. The ceasefire clock is now the most pressing factor in this crisis. It started on April 8th and runs approximately 2 weeks, putting the expiration date around April 22nd. That gives both sides roughly 9 days from the collapse of talks to either find a path back to the table or prepare for what comes next. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has urged both parties to honor the ceasefire and signaled Pakistan's willingness to keep facilitating dialogue. But the gap between the two positions looks almost impossible to bridge in that time frame. The United States described its offer as a final and best proposal, non-negotiable on the nuclear question. Iran insists on phased exchanges and trust-building steps before making any commitment of that scale. One side says, take it or leave it. The other says, earn our trust first. Neither is budging. The question of a second round of talks remains open, but fragile. Iran has said publicly that it remains open to diplomacy, but Ghalibaf's language about trust, combined with Araghchi's accusations of shifting goalposts, suggests Tehran will not return to the table under the same conditions. The American side, having framed the Islamabad proposal as its best and final offer, has very little room to soften its position without appearing weak domestically. Some analysts believe the U.S. presented its framework specifically as an ultimatum, knowing Iran would reject the nuclear provision, giving Washington the justification it needed to escalate to a full blockade. Iran sees this differently. From Tehran's perspective, agreeing to permanent zero enrichment under threat of war would set a precedent that any country with enough military power can force another to abandon its nuclear program through invasion. That is a line Iran's leadership has shown no willingness to cross, regardless of the cost. 9 days. That is all that stands between a fragile ceasefire and a return to open conflict in one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on Earth. 2 guided missile destroyers are already in position. Mines that even Iran cannot locate sit scattered across shipping lanes. And the single demand that could have prevented all of this, a commitment on nuclear weapons, remains the one thing neither side is willing to bend on. So here is the question this leaves us with, and I want your honest answer in the comments. If Iran agrees to give up its nuclear program under military pressure, does that create peace? Or does it just teach every other nation on Earth that the only way to avoid being forced into surrender is to build a bomb before anyone can stop you?